It was meant to be ceremonial, a symbolic discussion on unity, climate cooperation, and post-Brexit diplomacy, broadcast live from the Royal Albert Hall. A one-time-only televised event featuring global leaders seated not as adversaries, but as voices of shared vision. That was the pitch, that was the hope. But the moment Donald Trump entered the Grand Hall, red tie loose, jaw clenched, waving like he owned the place, everything shifted. The British side had prepared meticulously. The lighting was neutral, the flags balanced, the agenda tight. King Charles III, now well into the second decade of his reign, had agreed to attend only after it was made clear this would be a conversation, not a circus. Yet Charles could already feel it. The audience wasn't here for policy, they wanted drama. Trump was seated across from him at a crescent table flanked by advisors, with media cameras zoomed in like vultures over a battlefield. The former U.S. president leaned back in his chair, microphone already on, tapping his finger as if impatient for the fight he assumed was inevitable. Charles remained upright, composed. His suit was modest by royal standards, dark navy, no medals, no fuss. But the weight of centuries sat in his silence. He knew this wasn't just a debate. It was a test, not of policy, but of poise. The moderator cleared her throat. We begin today with a question on sovereignty and global cooperation. Your Majesty, how does the United Kingdom view its evolving role in a multipolar world? Charles nodded, his voice calm but firm. We view sovereignty not as a shield, but a responsibility. The Crown has no interest in conquest, only in stability, built through respect, dialogue, and a recognition that leadership must be earned anew each day. It was elegant. Measured. Trump smirked. Sounds like someone rehearsed that in front of a mirror, he said into the mic, chuckling. Let's be honest, Britain doesn't lead anymore. It follows. The hall tensed. The moderator hesitated. Charles didn't blink. He turned to Trump slowly. And yet, here we are. You across from me, sir, not the other way around. Gasps. The air thickened. Trump leaned forward, voice louder now. You know why I'm here, Charles? Because when real power walks into a room, it doesn't wear velvet robes. It makes deals. Charles looked at him, then at the cameras. Then let's deal in truth. The live feed caught it all, the flicker in Trump's eye, the murmurs among the audience, the quiet fury that simmered beneath centuries of monarchy and a man who thought the world should kneel when he entered a room. The Cold War hadn't begun with missiles this time. It began with a sentence. The silence that followed Charles's words wasn't quiet at all, it pulsed. Through earpieces, across satellite feeds, down Twitter timelines already erupting with clips. In the control room, producers whispered frantically. In the room, the tension didn't rise. It coiled. Trump leaned back again, adjusting his microphone as if to assert control. You talk about truth, Charles, he said, drawing out the name like a dare, but you wear it like a costume. You sit under gold ceilings in palaces built on the backs of others, and now you want to play the wise old man. Charles didn't flinch. But his hand moved, a slow, deliberate lift of a glass of water. Sip. Return to the table. It was the kind of move that said, I'm not rushing. I don't have to. Do you mistake heritage for hypocrisy, Mr. Trump? He asked, voice level, but sharp enough to slice. The difference is, I acknowledge mine. Trump waved a hand. You acknowledge it in speeches. But speeches don't pay bills. The UK needed us for trade. You still do. Charles gave a tight smile. We endured blitzes. We survived partitions. What makes you think we fear deficits? That landed. The audience rippled with hushed awe. This wasn't the Charles the tabloids painted. This was the Charles who had watched world leaders come and go, and learned which ones stayed too long at the party. Trump leaned forward, eyes narrowing. Let me guess, you're going to lecture me now? About decorum? Empire? Climate change? If you insist, Charles replied, arching an eyebrow. But I was rather hoping for a conversation. One that recognizes not every loud man is a leader. The jab hit. Trump laughed, too loud, a little forced. Look, you might still believe in queens and carriages. But where I come from, we believe in results. You wear a crown. I wore the White House. Charles's gaze didn't move. One was inherited. The other rented. A collective gasp. Even the moderator shifted in her seat. Trump's lips tightened. Careful, Your Majesty. No need for care, Charles said smoothly. We're both off script now. And indeed, they were. The diplomatic curtain had fallen. There were no safe zones left on the stage, just two men, two empires, and a table that suddenly felt too small for both. The war of words wasn't just personal. It was symbolic. Trump came to dominate. Charles came to define. And the world was watching every breath. For a moment, neither man spoke. But the room had never been louder, not with sound, but with meaning. The crowd leaned in. Phones hovered, recording not just words but the shifting weight of modern history. Trump was the first to break the pause. You're clinging to a past that no one fears anymore, Charles, he said, voice laced with derision. The empire is over. What exactly are you still king of? Charles turned slightly, his eyes scanning the vast crowd, then the red lights of the live cameras. When he spoke, it wasn't just to Trump. It was to the world. Of memory, he said. Of consequence. Of dignity, when it's least fashionable. Trump scoffed. You sound like a museum guide. Better than sounding like a real estate agent selling stolen dreams, Charles replied calmly. The moderator stiffened. She glanced at the producers. Cut. Delay. But they dared not interrupt. Trump leaned forward, the bravado starting to crack. You don't understand modern power, he said. People want strength. Not sermons. Charles leaned in too now, his voice lowered but unmistakably firm. Strength without wisdom is just noise. And you, Mr. Trump, are the loudest silence I've ever heard. The audience murmured. Even some of Trump's aides shifted uncomfortably. Then Charles stood, not in protest, but with gravity. The cameras pivoted to follow. I am not here to win, he said. I am here to remind. Remind who? Trump barked. The world doesn't need fairy tales. Charles stepped toward him. No, it needs reminders that kings can grow, and presidents can fall. And that not all crowns gleam for glory, some carry weight. Trump's reply was lost in the reaction. The room erupted. Not in applause, but in breath, a collective inhalation of the kind that comes when something irreversible has been said. Outside the venue, headlines were already being written. Inside, history had just entered the room, and sat at the king's shoulder. Charles didn't return to his seat. He remained standing, tall, unshaking, as if the entire weight of British history steadied his spine. Trump was still seated, but now noticeably stiff, his usual showman swagger replaced with something colder. He had come expecting applause. He hadn't expected a monarch with teeth. Let me ask you, Trump said suddenly, grasping for control. Where was your voice when the world needed strength? When Brexit tore Europe apart? When the economy stalled? Where was the crown then? Charles let the question hang before answering, not to dodge it, but to let it settle like fog across the audience. We do not shout, he said softly, because shouting drowns out thought. The crown listens. Advises. Holds. Not everything must be loud to be present. Trump smirked. And yet, no one listens anymore. Because noise is cheaper than truth, Charles said. You've proven that. Trump shifted in his chair, irritated. You think I'm the enemy here, don't you? Charles shook his head slowly. No. You are the mirror. You reflect a world that's forgotten its roots. But that doesn't make you the storm. Just its echo. The line lingered. One of Trump's aides leaned in, whispered something. Trump brushed him off. You want to sound wise, Charles. But you're clinging to ghosts. Kings don't matter. Elections do. Charles's reply came like a breeze before a storm. Kings endure. Presidents campaign. Trump stood now too, unwilling to be towered over. They were face to face, two symbols, two timelines. You think you're better than me? Trump asked. Charles didn't blink. I think I'm older than you, not just in years, but in memory. And memory, Mr. Trump, is something your style can't erase. The audience didn't clap. They held their breath. This wasn't theater anymore, it was a collision of two empires, one built on votes, the other on centuries. Neither man yielded. And outside, the world leaned closer to the screen, not for policy, not for diplomacy, but to witness what happens when legacy refuses to kneel to volume. Backstage, aides scrambled. Phones buzzed with updates from Washington, Downing Street, and diplomatic channels that hadn't expected this clash to spiral into philosophy and fire. The event had been planned as optics. But optics had given way to open flame. On stage, the moderator attempted to redirect. Perhaps we can pivot to global cooperation. I'd like to finish, Charles said, gently but firmly, never raising his voice. The moderator yielded, stunned at how effortlessly he commanded the room without force. Trump folded his arms. Go on then, Your Majesty. Show us what ruling from a museum looks like. Charles stepped forward, his shoes clicking softly on the polished floor. His words now had weight, not from volume, but from intention. You speak of ruling, Mr. Trump, but what you misunderstand is leadership. You wave a flag. I carry a legacy. And legacy, he paused, eyes fixed, is not about winning crowds. It's about outlasting storms. Trump scoffed. And what have you outlasted, exactly? Charles turned to the audience. I have seen prime ministers fall. I've seen economic collapse, rebellion, plague, even the decline of empires, including mine. And I am still here. Because I do not chase power, I endure it. Trump stepped forward too now, face flushed. You're stuck in the past. Britain's not an empire. You're just a man in a fancy suit whose country needs deals. Charles didn't look at him. He looked at the cameras. And yet you flew here. That hit harder than anyone expected. Trump faltered, just for a breath, but it was there. The realization that the world still turned its head when the crown spoke, even if it no longer bowed. You need to understand, Charles continued, the throne is not a weapon. It is a weight. You carried office like a brand. I carry memory like a burden. We are not the same. The hall was still. And in that stillness, a generation watching online began to sense the quiet truth, not all battles roar. Some merely refuse to bend. Trump paced now, like a showman denied his applause. He jabbed a finger toward Charles, not with violence, but with the urgency of a man slipping from control. You talk of burdens and memory like they're virtues. But they're just old chains in velvet boxes. We cut ours. That's why we win. Charles studied him calmly. And what have you won, exactly? Trump didn't answer immediately. Charles took a step closer, closing the space not with threat, but with truth. Is it victory when your allies doubt you? When your own people storm your institutions? When the world holds its breath not for your leadership, but your restraint? Trump clenched his jaw. I gave people a voice. You gave them permission to forget what dignity looks like, Charles replied. It wasn't shouted. It didn't need to be. The line hit like a church bell in a quiet town, deep, resonant, unmissable. The moderator sat back, eyes wide. Even she knew now, this wasn't a debate. It was a reckoning in real time. Charles turned to the audience again. I do not speak tonight as a monarch insulated by marble and tradition. I speak as a man who has witnessed the price of chaos. And I tell you, when we mock restraint as weakness, we invite ruin. Trump interjected, so what, we all just sit quietly and let the world fall apart? Charles shook his head. No. But we don't tear it down to rebuild it in our image alone. The room grew quiet again, but this time the silence wasn't tense. It was reverent. Because something had shifted. The crowd, once split, now leaned toward the voice that didn't shout. The one that didn't need to. Trump seemed to feel it too. He looked around, eyes narrowing, lips tightening. The room no longer bent to his rhythm. Charles had done something rare, he had stolen the spotlight not by grabbing it, but by making it follow. And the cameras didn't lie. They lingered on the king. For the first time in the entire evening, Trump looked unsure of what to say. His words, once sharp and brash, now circled in his mind, seeking a landing strip that had vanished. Across from him, Charles remained composed, no smirk, no triumph. Just stillness. The moderator finally interjected. Mr. Trump, would you like to respond? Trump straightened. Yeah. I would. He took a breath and leaned on the podium. You say I invited ruin. But at least I moved. I pushed. I made people feel again. Charles nodded slightly, acknowledging the truth inside the boast. But feeling without wisdom is fire without purpose. It burns the house, not warms it. A quiet gasp in the crowd. Trump's face tensed. I've built empires, Charles. Hotels, towers, movements. You've built facades, Charles replied gently. Steel and slogans. But leadership is what survives after the lights go off. Trump laughed bitterly. You really think your family, your name, your little island still matter? Charles stepped forward. No. I know what matters is what you do with the time you're given. And I've used mine, imperfectly, perhaps, but never recklessly. There it was again, truth wrapped in humility. The kind of honesty that didn't seek applause but still earned it. The audience remained frozen. Not in fear, but in awareness. Something meaningful was happening. A confrontation of two worlds, one that shouted, the other that remembered. And then Charles did something no one expected. He removed his signet ring, the symbol of royal heritage, lineage, weight, and placed it gently on the podium. This ring, he said, has passed through more than bloodlines. It has felt the heat of war, the tremble of independence, the silence of grief. And still, it endures. Trump looked at the ring, unsure whether to mock it or respect it. You don't have to understand the crown, Charles said. But you will remember it. The room didn't erupt. It held its breath. Because in that moment, the crown didn't just sit on a head. It spoke. Trump's voice came back, but it was slower now, less thunder, more defense. You're talking about symbolism, Charles. Rings, thrones, legacy. But the world runs on deals, dollars, and decisions. You live in a palace. I built an empire. Charles didn't flinch. You built a brand, not an empire. And empires, Mr. Trump, fall when they forget the difference. Trump looked away, briefly. A camera caught the flicker of hesitation in his eyes. He glanced toward his team off stage, then turned back. You think all this, the soft words, the soft power, will survive the next wave of history? Charles answered, voice calm as a tide. Soft power is the only kind that outlives the storm. Steel rusts. Fire fades. But dignity, even whispered, echoes. It wasn't poetry, it was precision. The moderator was frozen, her cue cards forgotten. She wasn't hosting anymore. She was witnessing. Trump stepped away from the podium, motioning toward the audience. You all love this, don't you? The calm, the class, the royal act. But you forget, I was elected. He was born into this. Charles nodded again, unfazed. And yet you sought this stage. That line struck deep. Trump had, after all, agreed to this debate. Not for policy. For legacy. And now, that legacy was being measured against more than politics, it was being weighed against poise. Charles walked back to his seat but paused before sitting. It's not that I think I'm better, Mr. Trump. It's that I know restraint is not weakness. And I know that power, when used to dominate, devours itself. Trump stared, eyes narrowed. Charles finished, you won applause. But I will be remembered. He sat. Not in triumph. In truth. The silence after that was not empty. It was full. Like the hush that follows a verdict. And across living rooms, phones, and media rooms worldwide, people didn't just watch. They listened. The debate was supposed to end with closing statements, but no one moved. Even the cameras, usually quick to pan away, lingered on the stage as if waiting for something more. But what more could be said? Trump finally broke the silence. You think history will be kind to you, Charles? To your family? Your scandals? Your silence on real issues? Charles stood once again, not to answer, but to conclude. History isn't kind, he said. It isn't cruel. It remembers. And I'd rather be remembered for listening too long than shouting too soon. Trump raised an eyebrow. Spoken like someone who's never had to fight for relevance. Charles didn't rise to the bait. Relevance is fleeting. Meaning is not. One day, people may forget what we wore, where we sat, even what we said. But they will not forget how we stood. And then he did something neither Trump nor the audience expected. He turned to the crowd, not the cameras, and gave a small, deliberate bow. Not the grand, sweeping kind. Just enough to say, I spoke. Now I respect your right to decide. The gesture stunned even Trump. For a split second, he seemed to consider matching it, but his pride stiffened his spine. Charles walked off stage without looking back. Trump remained. Alone. A microphone still live. But nothing left to say. Later that evening, news outlets scrambled to frame the story. Some called it, the clash of crowns and capital. Others simply, the night the crown spoke. In Britain, the BBC ran the headline, King holds his ground. In America, networks debated who won. But the footage told its own truth. Charles didn't win a debate. He won something rarer. He earned silence from a man who hated to lose. The sun rose over Windsor with a strange quiet. Newspapers hit doorsteps like small thunderclaps. King Charles strikes back, read one. Trump out-talked, asked another. But Charles wasn't reading any of them. He sat alone in his study, a steaming cup of Earl Grey untouched. Across the desk lay a single envelope, handwritten, no seal. A thank you from the debate committee. But it was the second note beside it that held his gaze. A message from a former prime minister. 5 words, you reminded us of something. Charles leaned back, not smug, but settled. He hadn't gone to war with Trump. He hadn't stooped to insult, or thrown a punch. He had done something harder. He had stood still while the storm raged, and outlasted it. Across the Atlantic, Trump's team scrambled to regain footing. Advisors blamed lighting, moderation bias, audience placement, anything but the truth, that for one night, bravado had met its limit. Clips flooded the internet. The Ring moment went viral. TikTok accounts looped Charles's lines. "I've used my time, imperfectly, but never recklessly. You don't have to understand the crown. But you will remember it." Youth, once disinterested in monarchy, shared his calm like wildfire. In classrooms from Manchester to Nairobi, the debate became curriculum. Not for who shouted loudest, but for what leadership looked like when it stood, unshaking, in the face of fire. Later that week, Charles delivered a short statement from Clarence House. No references to Trump. No boasts. Just a closing line that echoed louder than any headline. Silence can be dignity. But not when the world needs a voice. The Crown did not stay silent. And somewhere in a quiet corner of London, an old skeptic folded his newspaper, whispering to himself. He didn't raise his voice. He raised the bar. The screen fades. The debate is over. But the echo remains. In a world where noise often overshadows nuance, one debate reminded us what true leadership sounds like: calm, clear, and unshaken. King Charles didn't roar. He didn't threaten. He stood. And that, perhaps, said more than any microphone ever could. If this story stirred something in you, if you believe dignity still has a place in our public discourse, then don't just scroll on.